CampusReform.org. Media Director Cabot Phillips is with us in this hour. Democratic strategist Marjorie Clifton is also here. And from the Daily Caller, Chris Bedford. Let me start with you, Chris. You know, it's interesting because we were talking about this a little bit last hour, and there's all kinds of ways you can go on whether Mike Pence is really thinking about a run or Kasich is or somebody is. But I tell you, it does seem like the White House was very, very upset to see that this story was even written, right? This speculation was even being had in the New York Times or anywhere else.
Well, it's not good speculation for the White House because if you're a sitting president who's primaried by his own party, typically you lose. It does huge amounts of damage. Ronald Reagan, when he was running against Jimmy Carter, he would run campaign ads. There were repeating quotes attacking Carter from Ted Kennedy. Mike Pence, though, is definitely not the villain here. People are kind of constructing that through rumors, and it's probably coming from the fact that a lot of traditional Republicans and conservatives in D.C. secretly wish that Mike Pence was president because he's someone who they feel like they could deal with more effectively than Donald Trump. But he's a loyal soldier. He was through the entire campaign. Some conservatives who are critics of Trump attacked him over and over again, saying, how could you be so loyal to Trump? And he's never, ever shown in any point in his career that he would stab his boss in the back.
No, you know what's interesting about that, Marjorie, and as Chris started to make the point, going way back to the 1980 election, that the Ted Kennedy primary run weakened Jimmy Carter. Well, the Republicans had Ronald Reagan waiting to run in that race, and he's obviously a strong candidate and became president, served 2 terms. I don't know that the Democrats have somebody waiting in the wings this time, because that's the other part of the story that doesn't get talked about. I know this is all hypotheticals. We're all ahead of ourselves on all of this. But say it's all true.
Right.
Who do the Democrats have waiting to run against a weakened Donald Trump in 2020?
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. I don't think there is any clear front runner right now. Obviously, we still have quite a bit of time to go. But on the Mike Pence point, I think it's actually a smart strategy because there has been a lot of uneasiness and unsteadiness in this presidency. There's been question and talk of impeachment. There's divide in the Republican Party. Absolutely, he's out fundraising. And you have to also notice that since things have gotten tense with Trump, you haven't seen Mike Pence standing near him, around him, talking about him in the press. He's been keeping a very safe distance. And I think, you know, look, if he did end up in the White House, him having strong relationships with his other party members of the Republican Party and Democrats would be absolutely paramount, and having a campaign behind him. So I don't think these are unreasonable
well, it might not be that crazy, even if it's true that a politician, even a sitting vice president, but certainly these other people that were mentioned, whether it be Ben Sasse or John Kasich or any of these guys would be thinking about positioning themselves to run. Not if everything collapsed for the president, but say he decided not to run for some reason, and all of a sudden you have to get your apparatus. I understand that.
Right.
But the
he's
other
been
thing,
saying, I don't really enjoy this that much. Like, he's been talking about how hard it is, and, you know, who knows?
The other thing, to be fair to the sitting president as it stands, and we talked about this, Cabot, a little bit earlier, is that, you know, as crazy as some things seem on certain days, and, you know, we went through the Anthony Scaramucci stuff, whatever it may be, and there have been days where things just seem like, boy, what's going on here? There are other times if you take a step back and you say, well, the stock market's at a record high, some of these regulations that have been rolled back, many people that we speak to tell us have created a better business environment, that this is only 6 months in and not everything's a disaster, right? And we're putting up some other kind of quote-unquote accomplishments under the president. Many of them are business related, a better business environment, yet they're talking about primarying him. What do you make of that?
I think it's important to remember who's pushing these claims, and if they are in fact fantasy, what's the narrative behind them? So many of the critics that are pushing this idea that there's a coup brewing in the White House or in the Republican Party, and they would make it seem as if America is teetering on the edge of catastrophe, and they're ignoring the good things that President Trump is doing, the million jobs that are being created since he's taken office. And so I think a lot of this, American people have a trouble ascertaining what's true and what's not, because they know that the liberal media and the left have already pretty much made up their mind about how they're going to cover President Trump's administration.
That might be true.
So it's tough for them to see what's a big deal and what's not.
That might be true, but also Chris made a point. I'm going to go back to you, Chris, on this, I think, at the beginning, that might not be all that's to it, right? That the Republican establishment may be as big, if not a larger issue for this president than the liberal media and the left. We knew the liberal media and the left would be against a Republican president. Granted, maybe it's more so this time than it's been in the past. Even if all that's true, right, Chris, that there are a lot of people in his own party that are either not comfortable or maybe even worse than that with this president.
The entire time, if you go back to when he was nominated at the RNC out in Ohio, there were people who were plotting these kind of fantastic plots to have him removed and have him not get the nomination, to give it to Ted Cruz, to give it to John Kasich, and it doesn't.
It's like the Never Trump movie. You think this Never Trump movement is behind this more than anyone else, behind the speculation? If you had to guess, Chris, is that what you're saying?
That's the people who I'm hearing these Mike Pence things from a lot. Mike Pence is extremely popular with both conservatives and with establishment Republicans, but I hear his name come up almost daily. Names I don't hear come up almost daily as a primary challenger would be people like Ben Sass or people like John Kasich.
Right.
I haven't heard any whispers from that, but if you see Mike Pence, that's coming from the Never Trump crowd.
It's interesting. It's very interesting. I guess that's the right word. I'm not sure. Marjorie, let me go back to the Democrats. There are some signs that they're starting to get worried within the Democratic Party, if you read some of the articles, including this one from Politico, about overplaying their political hand when it comes to Russia and not focusing enough on the agenda. And that's kind of what Politico says. Democrats fear the Russia probe blowback. So what do you make of those kind of political wins, that for all this talk, every day of the week there's a lead story in some publication or another about the Russia investigation, and the president's approval rating has gone down to whatever it's gone down to, then maybe there is kind of a fatigue setting in, that the Democrats should be finding something else to talk about other than Russia, at least, and especially if nothing ever comes of it, of substance.
Right. Well, and money always talks. I mean, in every election, what it comes down to is how are people feeling about the economy, about the security of their jobs, and how that relates to their pocketbooks. And so absolutely the economic messages are going to be fundamental for Democrats. And they do need to figure out what their identity is around that, what they stand for related to that. And it's an interesting time because we talk about a lot of the policies that Trump is, pulling back on or helping businesses, but they're also in some cases hurting the very people who were his supporters, like the TPP workaround that happened in the UN today. That will be a problem because it's going to affect those manufacturing and labor
Get more specific on that. So you think the best Democratic strategy is an economic one? Because it would seem, well, go ahead. Tell me what you think it is, and these guys can react. What's the best Democratic strategy?
Well, it's always economics. I mean, Republican or Democrat, and who's doing a better job of communicating what that means, who's impacted by, basically policies, what it means to money in their pocket, and what it means, in terms of, culture. And the Democratic Party has traditionally been a very big tent. And unfortunately, that means trying to play to everybody's different belief systems. But what we know is that the numbers look different when it comes to who turns out to vote. While millennials are big supporters of Democrats, they don't show up at the polls. And the people that do are a lot of that older generation who typically lean more conservative. And I mean, the truth is in the math.
Because if Cabot, if I was making the other side of it from President Trump's point of view, I don't think I'd tweet about anything or talk about anything other than the current economic conditions. See, the jobs report we had on Friday, the record high for the stock market. I mean, you got to be a little careful. That could turn around in a heartbeat.
If the Democrats want to use the economy as a measuring stick for how people should vote, Republicans are going to gain an even bigger majority in the midterms in 2018. I think people are looking around. They're seeing the confidence in business. They're seeing the stock market breaking records every week. And go ahead. I think every time the Democrats spend a week talking about Russia, they're getting closer and closer to handing the election in the midterms in 2020 back to Republicans. Only 6% of Americans view Russia as the most important issue in this cycle. The other 94% think the economy and national security issues that the Republicans are talking about more are important.
What do you want to say, Marjorie, real quick, before I go back to Chris?
I would say economics does go beyond just jobs, though. You have to think about it in the context of health care, what the cost of health care means to a family, what it means to, different types of jobs, what it means on immigration, because immigration is fundamental for a lot of the tech jobs, for example, or migrant farm workers, how that impacts the farming community. So economics isn't just as simple as jobs numbers. It goes beyond that.
So, all right. So, Chris, as a final point, just to kind of bring it all together, if you're the Democrats putting together a strategy just in this kind of hypothetical scenario, what's the best place to go after it? Because in theory, a president with an approval rating in the 30s, if that's what we're dealing with when the midterms come around, should be fairly easy to beat, but maybe not.
Well, you'd think so, and a lot of the polls that we've seen aren't that great because we don't know who's actually a voter, who's changed. I got a chance to look at some polls just recently that have been done over the last 6 months, and it shows that there has been about a 7-point drop amongst the people who are strongly, strongly favorable of Donald Trump. I think that's from a constant barrage, and it's from the Republicans' failure to pass Obamacare repeal. But if Trump gets some things done,
like taxes,
then they're in trouble. And if the Democrats aren't talking about jobs, which they got slammed on in this last election, if they don't learn any of these elections or any of these lessons from past election and go for a more populist thing, the guys in Michigan, they're not going to vote for them. The guys in Pennsylvania are not going to come out and vote for Democrats because they think that Jeff Sessions is a Russian agent. It's just not going to work.
Well, maybe not. And no matter how much trouble the president is or appears to be in. All right, guys, thanks.